Have you ever looked at certain industries and just wondered, how do they consistently make so much money? While others, even with really great products, seem to be constantly struggling. What is it that makes some companies truly thrive, and others just barely scrape by, even when they're basically in the same market? Well, today our mission for this deep dive is to give you a really powerful lens for analyzing pretty much any industry. We want to give you a shortcut sort of to understanding the competitive dynamics, what's really going on under the hood, and what truly drives profitability. We'll be unpacking a really famous framework. It was developed by Michael Porter, who's a brilliant professor over at Harvard University. We're talking about Porter's 5 forces. It's this framework designed specifically to analyze competitive dynamics and really pinpoint the root causes of why some industries are more profitable than others. And ultimately, it helps companies figure out what makes them profitable. Before we dive deeper, just a quick reminder that this deep dive is based on material from Farhat lectures. All content examples and explanations discussed here are derived from the comprehensive accounting resources at farhatlectures.com. Whether you're an accounting student, CPA candidate, or a professional, definitely visit the website for additional practice questions, video lectures, and detailed support to reinforce today's topic. Special thanks to Professor Farhat for providing this valuable material. Okay, so Michael Porter's core finding is, well, it's elegantly simple, really. Generally speaking, the more intense the competition within an industry, the less profitable that industry tends to be. And we're going to explore the 5 critical dimensions he uses to measure this competition. And maybe, to make this really hit home, let's kind of keep one industry in mind as we go. Maybe the dynamic, sometimes cutthroat world of streaming entertainment.
Oh, that's a great idea. A perfect example. And you're right, this isn't just, abstract theory for a textbook. Understanding these 5 forces is absolutely crucial if you want to craft smart business strategies and, well, ultimately increase and sustain your profit. It's really about seeing the threats clearly, knowing how the game is played, and figuring out how to compete effectively in whatever market you're in. It lets you see the real economic structure.
Okay, let's unpack the first force then. Intensity of competitive rivalry. We talk about competition all the time, but what does intense competitive rivalry actually look like for a business? Does it always just boil down to price wars, or are there other ways companies fight each other? Maybe less obvious ways.
That's a great question because it's definitely more than just pricing. This force assesses how fiercely the existing players in an industry are really going at it, fighting for market share, fighting for profits. Think of it as the degree to which established firms are trying to dominate. It covers aggressive pricing, sure, but also big marketing pushes, differentiating their products, even rapidly adding capacity. And the more intense this rivalry gets, well, the less profitable the industry becomes for pretty much everyone involved. You see, high competition really erodes profitability in a couple of main ways. First, like you said, price wars. Companies feel forced to slash their selling prices, maybe to gain share, or maybe just to hold on to the customers they have. Imagine selling something for, say, $100. Your cost is $60, so you make $40 profit. Simple enough. But if fierce rivalry pushes you to drop that price to $80 just to stay competitive, bam, your profit gets cut in half, down to $20.
Wow, okay, that's a direct hit.
Exactly. And second, it leads to increased costs. To stand out or innovate or just keep customers loyal when there's lots of choice, companies have to spend a lot more. More on R&D, maybe huge advertising campaigns, making their products slightly different, or even bundling extra services. So let's say that same $100 product, your cost goes up from $60, $80 because you poured money into R&D for the next big feature or a massive marketing blitz. Well, even if your selling price stays at $100, your profit still drops to $20.
Got it. So it squeezes margins from both ends, lower prices or higher costs, or sometimes both. So applying this to our streaming example, the rivalry seems, well, incredibly intense. You've got Netflix, Disney+, Max, Hulu, all fighting for our eyeballs and subscription money. How does that play out for them with price and cost?
Precisely. In streaming, you see it constantly. Promotional pricing, introductory offers, bundling deals with other services, and the relentless need to produce or buy new exclusive content. That's a huge driver. This is a direct result of that intense rivalry. The budgets these platforms spend on original content are just staggering, billions and billions every year. That's a massive cost increase, and it directly eats into their potential profit margins. It's all driven by needing to be different and stop you, the subscriber, from just clicking away to a rival.
Yeah, the content budgets are insane.
And beyond just price and cost, other things can fuel high competition too. Like if the market isn't growing much or maybe even shrinking, then everyone's fighting harder for a smaller piece of the pie, right? That naturally ramps up the rivalry. Another really big factor is high exit costs. This basically means it's really expensive or difficult for a company to just leave an industry, even if it's not making much money. So they're kind of forced to just bite the bullet, stick around, and accept lower profits because shutting down would cost even more.
Like what kind of industries have high exit costs?
Think about the airline industry. They have massive fixed costs. The planes themselves cost a fortune. Plus, they have long-term agreements, maybe with unions or with aircraft manufacturers like Boeing or Airbus. It's incredibly difficult and costly for an airline to just say, okay, we're done, and shut down. So it traps companies in these fiercely competitive markets, even when profits are low.
Okay, so intense rivalry is definitely a profit killer. But is it possible for a company to differentiate itself so much that it almost kind of escapes some of that direct rivalry, even in a crowded market? Like, what if a streaming service somehow had, I don't know, all the content you could possibly want? Could they sidestep the fight?
Well, that's the dream, isn't it? That's the strategic goal. Find a unique value proposition, something that makes direct comparison harder and lessens the head-to-head competition. But even then, if the basic structure of the industry is high rivalry, it's a constant uphill battle. You might get a temporary edge, sure, but your rivals, they're always watching, always adapting. That hypothetical, all the content service would immediately become the new benchmark, the new target. It would just force everyone else to escalate the content arms race even further, which kind of proves the enduring power of intense rivalry, you see.
Fascinating. Okay, so the intensity of the existing competition is a huge factor for profit. But what about new players? What happens when the door to an industry is wide open, letting newcomers just flood in? This brings us nicely to Force 2, threat of new entrants. How easy or hard is it for new companies to jump into an existing industry, and how does that affect profitability?
Right. This force looks at what we call barriers to entry. Basically, how high are the walls around the industry? If it's easy for new companies to enter low barriers, you're going to see more competition pop up all the time. And as we just discussed, more competition generally means lower profits for everybody. So existing companies, naturally, they want high barriers. They want to protect their curve, protect their profits.
Can you give some examples of industries where it's pretty easy to get started? Low
Well,
barriers.
sure. Think about maybe opening a local tax preparation business.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, it's not that hard to set up a small office, get the right software and training, maybe a certification, and you're in business. Or what about a grass cutting service? You buy some decent equipment, maybe print some flyers or advertise online locally, and you can start getting clients pretty quickly. Those have relatively low barriers.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about the opposite? What makes it really hard to enter an industry? What are the signs of high barriers?
Well, several big ones. First, high capital requirements. This means you just need a massive amount of money up front for things like equipment, factories, technology. Think about manufacturing cars or trying to start a new major airline. You're talking billions of dollars just to get off the ground. That's a huge barrier.
Yeah, definitely not something you start in your garage.
Exactly. Then there's strong brand loyalty. If customers already love and trust existing brands, think Coca-Cola or McDonald's or even Apple, a newcomer faces a monumental task. You'd need to spend an enormous amount on advertising and marketing just to get noticed, let alone convince people to switch. And that's super risky and expensive. Economies of scale are another big one. This is where the existing large players can produce things so efficiently at such a large volume that their cost per item is way lower than what a small newcomer could possibly achieve. Hard to compete on price then.
Right, they have a built-in cost advantage.
Precisely. And finally, don't forget government regulation and approval. Some industries require extensive permits, licenses, safety certifications. It can be a really long, complex, and costly process. Think about pharmaceutical companies trying to get a new drug approved, or, again, commercial airlines needing safety and operational approvals. These regulations can act as significant barriers.
So industries with these high barriers, auto manufacturing, maybe those big fast food giants, even big pharma, they tend to be more profitable for the companies already inside the walls because fewer new competitors can get in. But you mentioned a downside earlier. Is there a hidden risk to having these high barriers? Let's take streaming again. Initially, maybe barriers seemed lower because it was digital, but now it seems like the barrier is content, right, which costs a fortune.
That's a really important point, getting into the strategic implications. Because yes, while high barriers generally mean less competition and potentially higher profits for the incumbents, those companies often have incredibly high fixed costs. They're very capital intensive, precisely because they've built up those barriers, the factories, the brand, the R&D labs, and this can actually make them less agile, maybe more vulnerable during economic downturns. If their revenue dips, they still have to cover those huge fixed costs. They could find themselves operating at a significant loss pretty quickly. That's a major risk. And for streaming, you nailed it. The cost of acquiring or creating compelling content is the massive barrier now. It might look easy to launch a streaming platform technically, but can you afford the hundreds of millions or even billions needed for that constant stream of original shows and movies that keep subscribers hooked? That's where the real barrier is today. And ironically, it makes these supposedly agile tech companies almost as capital intensive as the old traditional media giants they disrupted.
That's a fascinating twist. So those high barriers can almost become a vulnerability if the market shifts. Is it always a disadvantage then, having high fixed costs? Or can companies manage that risk?
Oh, it's not inherently a disadvantage if it's managed well. Companies with high fixed costs, they thrive on volume, on scale. They mitigate the risk by being really aggressive in gaining and maintaining market share, ensuring they have consistent demand to cover those costs. Or sometimes they diversify their revenue streams. Think of a huge theme park. Massive fixed costs, right? But they diversify with hotels, merchandise, food, special events, all to keep people coming and spending. For streaming, it means constantly pushing for global expansion, adding more subscribers, and broadening their content library to justify those enormous content investments.
Okay, that makes sense. Managing the scale is key. All right, moving away from the internal battle, the threat from outside, let's talk about external pressures. Specifically, how much power do the suppliers to an industry hold over its profitability? This brings us to Force 3, bargaining power of suppliers.
Right. This force looks closely at the power held by the companies or individuals who supply inputs to the industry. And when we say suppliers, it's important to think broadly. It's not just about raw materials, like steel for a car maker. It also includes crucial labor sources, especially specialized labor, think nurses in healthcare, CPAs in accounting, skilled IT professionals, or even powerful organized labor groups like pilot unions in the airline industry. They're all suppliers.
Ah, okay. So labor can be a supplier too.
Absolutely. And the impact here can be really significant. If suppliers are powerful, they can pretty much dictate terms. They can raise prices for their goods or services. They can control the quality, sometimes even limit access to essential inputs. And all of this directly impacts a company's profitability.
Hmm.
If your key suppliers raise their prices, your cost of goods sold goes up and your profit margin shrinks. It's a direct hit.
So what gives suppliers that kind of power? What makes them strong?
Well, typically it happens if there are only a few suppliers available for a critical input, not many alternatives for the buyer. Or if it's really costly and difficult for the buyer, the company in the industry, to switch from one supplier to another. High switching costs, we call them. Also, if the supplier has unique expertise, maybe proprietary technology or specialized products that are hard for anyone else to replicate, they definitely hold more power.
Can you give us an example where the supplier clearly has the upper hand and maybe one where the company has more power? How does this look in streaming?
Sure. Think about major car manufacturers again. They depend on these huge, complex networks of suppliers for critical parts, engines, transmissions, tires, sophisticated electronics. Now, if only a few suppliers specialize in, say, a certain type of advanced sensor system that's essential for new safety features, those suppliers have leverage. They can potentially raise their prices, and that directly impacts the car maker's bottom line. Conversely, think about a giant retailer like Walmart. Because they buy in such massive quantities, they often have enormous bargaining power over their suppliers. Suppliers might have to accept lower prices or tougher terms just to get their products onto Walmart shelves and gain access to that huge customer base. That's a case where the buyer clearly has the power.
Okay, I see the contrast.
Now for streaming, who are the suppliers? They're the content creators, the major film studios, the TV production companies, even individual star actors, directors, writers, or sports leagues selling broadcast rights. If a particular studio owns the rights to a massively popular movie franchise or TV show that everyone wants to watch, well, they have significant bargaining power when negotiating licensing deals with streaming platforms like Netflix or Disney Plus fall. We see this constantly with exclusive content deals, right? Platforms pay enormous sums, sometimes seemingly crazy amounts, just to secure the rights to that hot show or movie. That's a clear sign of the supplier's power in action.
Right, the bidding wars for content.
Exactly. But on the other hand, if a streaming service becomes absolutely massive, say with hundreds of millions of subscribers globally, they might gain more leverage when negotiating with smaller, independent filmmakers or production houses. Those smaller creators might desperately need access to that huge audience, giving the platform more power to set terms. So it can shift depending on the specific relationship.
Interesting. So it really depends on who needs whom more in that specific transaction.
Yeah.
Okay, let's flip it around one more time. What about the power of the customer, the buyer? How much can they influence a company's profitability? This is force 4, bargaining power of buyers.
Exactly. This force assesses how much power customers or buyers have to push back on companies in an industry. Can they demand lower prices? Can they insist on better quality or more features? Can they negotiate more favorable terms? The stronger the buyer's bargaining power, the more influence they have. And typically, the lower the industry's overall profitability tends to be because companies have to concede more to keep them happy.
What gives buyers that kind of leverage?
Several things really boost buyer power. A huge one is the availability of options or substitutes. If customers have lots and lots of choices for similar products or services, they have way more leverage. They can easily walk away if they don't like the price or terms.
Makes sense. More choice equals more power for me.
Precisely. Another key factor is the concentration of buyers. Think about it. If a company sells most of its output to just a few very large buyers, maybe big corporations or government agencies, losing even one of those buyers could be devastating. So those big buyers have a lot of power. But if a company sells to a huge number of small individual buyers, like say a streaming service with a $15 a month subscription versus maybe a consultant selling a $5,000 training course to corporations, then each individual buyer has very little power on their own. Losing one $15 subscriber isn't a big deal. Losing one $5,000 client hurts more.
Ah, okay, the volume versus value per customer.
Right. Then there's price sensitivity. If buyers are extremely focused on getting the lowest possible price, companies are constantly under pressure to offer discounts or promotions, which of course steadily eats away at profits. Low switching costs are also huge. If it's super easy and cheap for buyers to switch from one company's product or service to another, think about how easy it is to cancel one streaming service and sign up for another with just a few clicks. Buyers have enormous power. There's very little holding them back.
Yeah, switching streaming services is almost frictionless.
Totally. And finally, think about informed buyers. The internet has given buyers access to an unprecedented amount of information. Prices, reviews, quality comparisons, expert opinions, it's all readily available. I remember hearing stories about car dealers back in the, say, mid-1990s. They kind of controlled the information about pricing and car values. Now, anyone can pull out their phone and instantly look up the Blue Book value, see what similar cars recently sold for, read reviews. It gives the buyers so much more negotiation power than they used to have.
That's so true. Information is power, and buyers have way more information now. So it sounds like in many industries today, especially consumer-facing ones like streaming, buyers have a lot of power due to options and low switching costs.
Yeah.
It feels like companies are always on the defensive. Are there any industries where, despite maybe having many buyer options, companies still manage to hold significant power over their customers?
That's a really sharp question. Because while high buyer power often squeezes profits, companies aren't helpless. They can fight back. They can mitigate buyer power through really strong brand differentiation, making their products seem unique and essential, or by creating a powerful ecosystem that locks customers in, or just by fostering incredibly deep customer loyalty that goes way beyond just price. Think about Apple. There are tons of other smartphones out there, right? But Apple's integrated ecosystem, the iPhone, Mac, iCloud, App Store, and their incredibly strong brand loyalty give them significant power over their buyers, allowing them to command premium prices.
Ah, the walled garden effect.
Exactly. Or think about industries where network effects are really strong, like social media platforms. The more people use Facebook or LinkedIn, the more valuable it becomes for everyone on the platform, which makes it harder for individual users to just leave, even if they're unhappy with certain aspects. It reduces their individual bargaining power. Streaming companies try to achieve a similar effect with that exclusive must-have content. They hope that having that one show everyone is talking about will lock you in, making you less likely to cancel even if the price goes up a bit. It's an attempt to reduce buyer power through content loyalty.
Got it. So the more choices and information a customer has, generally the more power they wield. often leading to slimmer profit margins. But companies can strategize to counteract that. It really changes how businesses have to operate. Okay, finally, let's explore the fifth force, threat of substitutes. How does the existence of completely different kinds of products or services, maybe even things outside the immediate industry, impact profitability?
Right. This force looks at the availability of alternative products or services that can fulfill basically the same need for the customer, but maybe in a different way. They aren't direct competitors in the same industry category, but they offer a substitute solution. If these substitutes are readily available, if they offer similar benefits, maybe at a lower price or perhaps with greater convenience, they pose a really significant threat. This directly pulls down the potential profitability for the original industry because customers have these viable alternatives they can switch to. And the really insightful part about understanding substitutes isn't just knowing they exist. It's realizing that what a customer perceives as a substitute can be incredibly broad. It often extends way beyond just the direct competitors to entirely different ways of solving their problem or meeting their need.
Okay, can you give us a strong example of this? Maybe thinking beyond just, say, one brand of soda versus another. How does this apply to streaming in a broader sense?
Well, sticking with striving for a second, but broadening the view, like you said, if you don't like Netflix, yes, an obvious substitute is Amazon Prime Video or Disney Plus or Hulu. Those are direct competitors, but also substitutes in a way. Switching costs are minimal. They offer broadly similar entertainment value, so that constant pressure keeps all streaming companies on their toes, needing to keep their libraries fresh and prices competitive.
Right, easy switch.
But now, think really broadly about substitutes for streaming. If your underlying need is simply entertainment or something to do in the evening, what are the substitutes? It could be watching videos on YouTube or scrolling through TikTok. It could be playing video games. It could be reading a book. It could be listening to a podcast like this one, or
Yeah.
even just going out for a walk or meeting friends.
Okay. Anything else that fills that entertainment need?
Exactly. The customer's perception of what counts as an acceptable substitute is the key here. This constant underlying pressure from this huge range of substitutes forces companies, even market leaders, to continually justify their value. It can even push them to lower prices. Think about Tesla in the electric car market. Yes, they compete with other EV makers like GM or Ford, but the ultimate substitute for buying any car, electric or otherwise, could be using public transportation, ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft, cycling, or even just working from home more. Tesla isn't just competing for your electric car dollar, they're competing for your overall transportation dollar, or even just your mobility solution. That pressure from broader substitutes is always there, even for innovators.
Wow, that really widens the lens on competition. It's not just the company next door.
Precisely. The ability for a customer to satisfy their core need in a fundamentally different way always keeps industries innovating and, frankly, a bit nervous. So to kind of bring this all together, in pretty much any industry that isn't a pure monopoly, competition is generally intense, and it comes from multiple directions. Companies really need to get their heads around these five forces: the intensity of rivalry among the existing players, the threat coming from new entrants trying to get in, the bargaining power held by their suppliers, the leverage exerted by their buyers, and that ever-present threat of substitutes to truly deeply understand their competitive landscape. It's not just about what your direct competitor across the street is doing, it's about understanding this whole economic ecosystem you operate within.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about Porter's five forces? Understanding this isn't just for, MBA students or CEOs crafting grand strategies. It's actually a really powerful framework for making better sense of the economic world all around you. Whether you're thinking about a cool new startup disrupting an old industry, or maybe watching an established giant trying to hold on to its position.
Exactly right. This knowledge helps companies strategize more effectively. It helps them find real, meaningful ways to differentiate themselves from the pack. And ultimately, it helps them protect their profits, maybe even grow them. By understanding and actively managing or even trying to influence these forces, a business can potentially maintain better pricing power, attract and retain better talent, and really thrive, even when things get tough competitively. It helps them see where the real value, the real profit pools actually are in their industry.
And for you, it means you can look at pretty much any industry now, whether it's high-tech or retail or healthcare, whatever interests you, and quickly get a grasp of its core competitive challenges and its opportunities. It helps you see beyond just the service headlines, the latest product launch or quarterly earnings report, and understand the underlying profitability dynamics that are really driving success or failure in that space. It can make you a much more informed consumer or investor or even employee. So maybe as you go about your day to day or this week, pick an industry you follow, or maybe a company you admire, or even one you dislike. Try to think about it through this lens. How do these five forces seem to play out in their world? Is the threat of substitutes really high, pushing them to constantly innovate? Are powerful suppliers maybe squeezing their margins? Are new entrants constantly nipping at their heels? What stands out to you about their specific competitive reality?
That's a great exercise. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep applying these insights. You might even start noticing how some really smart companies actively work to change these forces in their favor. Maybe they invest heavily in branding to build loyalty and deter new entrants. Or they innovate relentlessly to make their products seem indispensable, reducing buyer power. Or they vertically integrate to control their supply chain. It's often a dynamic interplay, not just a static picture. Keep looking deeper.